The room was quieter than the world ever allowed him to be. No spotlight, no applause, no orchestra warming up in the background. Just the soft, uneven sound of a heart monitor. And Ozzy holding Dean Martin's hand. Ozzy had been there for hours, long enough to forget time. Long enough for the jokes to stop coming. Long enough for the legend in the bed to look less like Dean Martin and more like a tired man who had lived a very loud life. Dean's hand felt thin, fragile. Nothing like the confident grip that once pulled people into laughter music and endless nights. Ozzy noticed every small thing. The shallow rise of Dean's chest, the way his eyes stayed closed longer between breaths, the way the room seemed to hold its breath with him. Doctors had already said what there was to say. Family had already come and gone. Now it was just this. Ozzy leaned closer, afraid that even breathing too loudly might steal a moment they didn't have left. He didn't speak. He didn't need to. Being there was the promise. Being there was the message. Then Dean's fingers moved. Not much, just enough. They tightened around Ozzy's hand, weak, but intentional, a silent request not to be alone. Ozzy felt his throat tighten instantly. Legends weren't supposed to feel this small. Icons weren't supposed to fade like this. And yet, here he was, watching one of the greatest voices of a generation slowly slip away in a room that barely remembered who he was. Ozzy whispered his name. Dean, I'm here. Dean's lips moved, barely forming sound. His eyes stayed closed, but his face changed, like he was somewhere else now. Somewhere far. Somewhere familiar. Ozzy leaned in even closer, his forehead almost touching Dean's. He didn't want to miss it. Not a word, not a breath. Not whatever was coming next. The machines kept beeping, too steady, too calm for what this moment was. Dean squeezed his hand again, harder this time, summoning something from deep inside himself. And then, in a voice so quiet it felt like it belonged only to the two of them, he spoke. What Dean said next wasn't dramatic. It wasn't poetic. It wasn't something you'd expect from a man remembered for charm and laughter. But the moment the words left Dean's lips, Ozzy felt something inside him crack. Because some goodbyes don't sound like goodbyes at all. And some last words stay with you longer than a lifetime. The hallway outside the room was dim, washed in that pale hospital light that never quite feels real. Ozzy had stepped out only once, just long enough to breathe, just long enough to steady himself, before returning to Dean's bedside, like something might change if he stayed away too long. Inside, time moved differently. The curtains were half drawn. Evening light slipped through the glass, soft and orange, touching Dean's face in a way that almost made him look peaceful. Not gone, just resting. The machines kept their quiet rhythm, a reminder that this calm was borrowed, not permanent. Ozzy pulled the chair closer to the bed. It creaked slightly, and he froze, apologetic like he'd disturbed something sacred. He sat down slowly and reached for Dean's hand again, relieved when the fingers didn't pull away. For years, Dean Martin had filled rooms without trying. Laughter followed him. Music bent around him. People leaned in whenever he spoke, even when he wasn't saying much at all. He made everything look effortless. Success, charm, friendship, especially friendship. And Ozzy had seen all of that up close. The late nights after shows, the backstage quiet after the noise faded, the moments no one ever photographed. Two men sitting in silence, sharing a drink, talking about nothing important and everything that mattered. Dean was always like that. He never rushed people. Never made you feel small. When he gave you his attention, it felt complete. Now, seeing him here, Ozzy felt the weight of every unspoken memory. Dean's breathing shifted. A small sound escaped him, almost like he was trying to speak but couldn't quite find the strength. Ozzy leaned forward instantly. I'm here, he said again, softer this time. You don't have to try. Dean's eyelids fluttered but didn't open. His face tightened for a moment, like he was fighting something only he could see. Ozzy watched helplessly, wishing he could do more than just sit and hold a hand. Hospitals had a way of stripping away illusions. Titles didn't matter here. Fame didn't matter. Records, awards sold, out nights. None of it could bargain for another hour, another breath. Ozzy thought about how many people would have given anything to be in this room, how many would have called themselves Dean's friend. And yet, here it was quiet, almost empty. Just him. Not because he was famous, not because he was expected to be there, but because he chose to be. Dean stirred again. His fingers twitched, brushing against Ozzy's knuckles like he was checking that the connection was still real. Ozzy squeezed back gently, afraid of hurting him. "You did good," Ozzy whispered, though he wasn't sure why he said it. Maybe he was saying it to Dean. Maybe he was saying it to himself. Outside, footsteps passed, voices murmured. Life continued, unaware that one of its brightest voices was dimming behind a closed door. Ozzy's mind drifted to a promise made years ago during a conversation that had felt casual at the time, one of those half-joking, half-serious talks people have when they assume there's plenty of time left. "If I ever go first," Dean had said back then, smiling, "don't let me go alone." At the time, they'd laughed it off. Now, sitting there, Ozzy realized this moment wasn't an accident. It was a choice fulfilled, a promise kept. Dean's breathing slowed again. The machines adjusted, responding faster than any human could. Ozzy leaned closer, his heart pounding, sensing something shifting in the air. That quiet warning that moments were running out. Dean's lips moved once more. This time, Ozzy knew whatever came next would matter. Ozzy didn't always remember the first time he met Dean Martin. Not because it wasn't important, but because Dean had a way of making beginnings feel familiar, like you'd known him long before you actually did. No awkward introductions, no forced smiles, just that easy warmth that disarmed people without them realizing it. Back then, Dean was already Dean Martin. The voice, the confidence, the reputation that walked into rooms before he did. And yet, when he spoke to Ozzy, there was no performance, no ego, just curiosity. "You look like someone who listens more than he talks," Dean had said once, raising his glass with that half-smile. "Those are the dangerous ones." Ozzy had laughed, but the words stuck. Their friendship didn't grow loudly. It didn't need headlines or public moments. It grew in the quiet spaces, in dressing rooms after the crowds were gone, in long car rides where the radio played low, in conversations that drifted from jokes to regrets, without either of them noticing the shift. Dean talked about success like it was something that had happened around him. Not because of him, he never bragged, never listed accomplishments. When people praised him, he deflected with humor. When they left, he got quieter. "There's a loneliness people don't talk about," Dean admitted one night, staring into his drink. "When everyone knows your name, but not many know you." Ozzy understood that kind of loneliness. Fame made people visible and invisible at the same time, surrounded yet untouched. They shared memories that never made it into interviews, stories of mistakes, missed chances, people they wished they'd called more often. Dean especially carried that weight lightly on the surface and heavily underneath. "I was good at making people laugh," Dean once said. "I wasn't always good at staying." That line stayed with Ozzy for years. As time passed, life did what it always does, pulled them in different directions. Tours, projects, long gaps between phone calls. But whenever they crossed paths again, nothing felt lost. Dean would greet him the same way every time, as if no time had passed at all. "Still here," he'd say. "Guess that counts for something." Now, sitting beside him in this hospital room, Ozzy saw all those years stacked quietly on Dean's chest, each breath carrying memories, each pause heavy with things that would never be said out loud again. Dean had outlived many of the people who once filled his life. Some drifted away. Some were lost to time. Some stayed famous, but distant. The applause faded long before the friendships did. And when it did, not everyone knew how to stay. Ozzy stayed, not because Dean was a legend, but because Dean had always shown up when it mattered. He remembered a night years ago when Ozzy had hit a low point, exhausted, overwhelmed, questioning everything. Dean hadn't offered advice. He hadn't tried to fix anything. He just sat there, quiet, present, steady. "Some storms don't need words," Dean had said. "They just need someone who won't leave." That was Dean's gift presence. And now in this room, the roles had reversed. Ozzy adjusted his grip gently as Dean shifted. His breath shallow but steady enough to keep hope alive. The man who once commanded stages now struggled with each inhale. Yet there was still a dignity to him. A calm acceptance that felt almost intentional. Ozzy wondered what Dean was thinking. What memories were passing through his mind? Was he back on stage somewhere? Was he hearing laughter? Or was he simply aware of the hand holding his, grounding him to this moment? The beeping machines felt intrusive now, too mechanical for something this human. Ozzy wished he could turn them off, wished the world would give them privacy for what was coming. He leaned closer and spoke softly, not expecting an answer. "You didn't go alone," he said. "You kept your word." Dean's fingers tightened faintly, just enough to be felt. It was then that Ozzy realized this wasn't just a goodbye, it was a reckoning. A lifetime folding in on itself, all the noise giving way to something simple and final. And whatever Dean was about to say next, whatever words he had been saving, Ozzy knew they would come from the deepest place a person could speak from. The place where nothing is left to prove. The air in the room changed in a way Ozzy couldn't explain. Nothing visible shifted. The lights stayed the same. The machines continued their steady rhythm. But something deeper settled in, heavy and unmistakable. The kind of stillness that announces itself without words. Dean's breathing grew uneven. Each inhale took longer, like his body was negotiating whether it was worth the effort. Ozzy noticed immediately. He straightened in his chair, every sense alert now, counting breaths without meaning to. 1, 2. Pause. 1, 2. Longer pause. "Hey," Ozzy whispered, leaning closer. "I'm right here." Dean's hand, still wrapped in his, felt cooler than before. Ozzy adjusted the blanket gently, careful not to disturb him too much. He hated how fragile everything felt, like even love had to move slowly now. Dean's brow tightened, his face pulling inward as if he were climbing some invisible hill. His lips parted slightly, but no sound came out. Just air, just effort. Ozzy felt panic rise in his chest, sharp and sudden. He pushed it down immediately. This wasn't about him losing control. This was about staying steady, being the calm Dean had always been for others. "It's okay," Ozzy murmured. "Take your time." The machines responded with soft beeps, adjusting, watching more closely than they had before. The sound felt louder now, too loud. Ozzy wished he could silence them. Wished the moment could exist without witnesses. Dean's fingers twitched again, this time not searching, tightening. His grip strengthened, surprising Ozzy. It wasn't strong, but it was intentional. Desperate, almost. Ozzy squeezed back without thinking. "I've got you," he said, voice low and certain. "You're not alone." Dean's eyelids fluttered. For a split second, Ozzy thought they might open. He leaned in instinctively, heart pounding, afraid to miss the smallest thing, but they stayed closed, lashes trembling like they were caught between worlds. Time stretched thin. Every second felt louder than the last. Ozzy became acutely aware of everything. The faint hum of electricity in the walls, the soft hiss of oxygen, the weight of his own breathing. He matched his breath to Dean's without realizing it, trying to carry him through each inhale. Dean's chest rose, paused, then fell. Ozzy swallowed hard. "This is okay," he whispered, even though he wasn't sure who he was convincing. "You can rest." The words felt final the moment he said them, and that terrified him. Dean shifted slightly, his head turning just enough to suggest awareness. His lips moved again, forming something this time, a shape, a beginning. Ozzy leaned closer, his ear inches from Dean's mouth. "I'm listening," he said softly. Dean tried to speak. The sound that came out was fragile, broken, barely a whisper. Ozzy strained to hear, heart hammering so loudly he was afraid it would drown Dean out. The effort clearly cost him. His breathing faltered, and his grip tightened again, nails pressing lightly into Ozzy's skin, like an anchor. Ozzy didn't pull away. He welcomed the pressure, let it ground him. "It's okay," Ozzy repeated. "You don't have to rush." But something in Dean's expression changed, a subtle shift, like resolve settling in. The struggle in his face softened, replaced by something calmer, clearer, as if he had finally decided what mattered enough to say. Ozzy felt tears burn behind his eyes. He blinked them away, refusing to let them fall yet. This wasn't the moment for his grief. This was Dean's moment. Outside the room, a cart rolled past. Someone laughed faintly down the hall. Life, indifferent and cruel in its timing, continued as usual. Inside, the space between breaths grew longer. Dean inhaled, shallow, trembling, and held it. Ozzy felt the tension coil through his own body, every muscle tight, waiting. Then Dean exhaled slowly, and when he spoke again, the words came with it, not loud, not dramatic, just honest. Ozzy froze, every nerve alight, because whatever Dean was about to say, Ozzy could feel it. This wasn't something meant for the world. It was something meant for him. And he knew in that instant that these words would follow him long after the machine stopped, long after the room emptied, long after the silence settled in. Ozzy leaned closer, holding Dean's hand as firmly as he dared. Dean began to speak. Dean's lips trembled as if the words themselves were heavy, like they had weight, like they'd been waiting a long time to be let go. Ozzy leaned so close he could feel Dean's breath against his cheek, thin, warm, fragile. He didn't move, didn't blink. He held Dean's hand like it was the last solid thing left in the world. Dean spoke again, slower this time. I was scared. The words barely made it out, but they landed hard. Ozzy's chest tightened instantly. Of all the things Dean Martin could have said, regrets, memories, jokes, famous last lines, this wasn't one of them. Dean Martin wasn't supposed to be afraid. He was the man who made fear look foolish, the man who laughed his way through life. But this wasn't a stage. Ozzy swallowed. It's okay, he whispered. You don't have to be. Dean's grip tightened weakly, like he was holding on to that reassurance, testing it. I didn't mean scared of dying, Dean continued, each word costing him effort. I made peace with that. A while ago. Ozzy felt tears finally spill, silent and unstoppable. He didn't wipe them away. Dean paused, breath shaking, then spoke again. I was scared of being remembered wrong. That was when something inside Ozzy broke, not loudly, not all at once. Just a quiet crack, deep in his chest. Dean's voice grew steadier for a moment, as if saying this mattered enough to borrow strength from somewhere else. They remember the smile, he said. The songs, the jokes. A faint breath, almost a laugh. They don't remember. The staying. Ozzy squeezed his hand, shaking his head gently. I remember, he said immediately. I remember all of it. Dean's face softened. Relief passed over it, subtle but unmistakable. I wasn't always good, Dean whispered. At being there, at choosing people over applause. He took a shallow breath. But when it mattered, when it really mattered, I tried. Ozzy nodded through tears. You did, he said, more than you know. Dean turned his head slightly as if trying to face Ozzy, though his eyes never opened. His voice dropped even lower, almost disappearing. Promise me something. Ozzy didn't hesitate. Anything. Dean's fingers trembled in his. Don't let them make me larger than I was. A pause. Tell them I was human. Ozzy pressed his forehead gently against Dean's hand, his voice breaking for the first time. I promise. Dean exhaled slowly, like he'd been holding that request in for years. The tension in his face eased, lines smoothing, his jaw unclenching. Then, after another long pause, he spoke one last time. Thank you for staying. That was it. No grand goodbye. No dramatic farewell. Just gratitude. Ozzy felt it hit him all at once. The weight of those words, the years behind them, the quiet truth in them. Staying wasn't flashy, it didn't make headlines, but it was everything. I wasn't going anywhere, Ozzy whispered, his voice barely holding together. Dean's grip loosened slightly, his hand growing heavier in Ozzy's palm. His breathing slowed again, the pauses stretching longer now. Ozzy stayed exactly where he was. He didn't rush him, didn't beg him, didn't try to pull him back. He just stayed. The machines continued their soft rhythm, unaware that something sacred had just been said. The room felt fuller and emptier at the same time. Dean's chest rose once more, then fell. Ozzy waited. Another breath came, shallow, fading. Ozzy held his hand tighter, as if love alone could keep him anchored. When the next breath didn't come, Ozzy didn't move. He didn't let go. Because some last words don't ask for tears. They ask to be carried. And Ozzy would carry them for the rest of his life. The room didn't change right away. The lights stayed on. The machines kept humming. The world refused to acknowledge what had just happened. Ozzy sat perfectly still, Dean's hand still resting in his own, heavier now, not with tension, but with absence. The grip that had once responded was gone, not pulled away, just quiet. He waited. Not because he didn't understand, but because letting go felt like saying it out loud. The heart monitor hesitated. One beat stretched longer than the rest. Then another. Then a sound Ozzy had heard before. One he had always feared hearing again, flat, final, unforgiving. The machine began to protest, sharp and insistent, as if noise could undo what silence had already claimed. Ozzy didn't react. He didn't jump, didn't stand, didn't cry out. He simply bowed his head and closed his eyes, still holding Dean's hand, as if the body might remember the promise, even if the breath could not. A nurse appeared in the doorway moments later. She stopped when she saw him. The stillness, the hand-holding, the way Ozzy hadn't moved an inch. She softened immediately, lowering her voice, slowing her steps. "I'm so sorry," she said gently. Ozzy nodded once, barely perceptible. The nurse reached for the monitor, silencing it. The sudden quiet was deafening. Without the beeps, the room felt unreal, like time had been unplugged. She hesitated. "Take all the time you need." Ozzy didn't answer. He wasn't ready to speak yet. Words felt useless now. Everything that mattered had already been said. The nurse stepped back and quietly closed the door. Alone again, Ozzy finally looked at Dean's face, truly looked. The tension was gone now, the struggle. The effort. Dean looked lighter somehow, like someone who had finally put something down after carrying it too long. Ozzy brushed his thumb gently over Dean's knuckles, a small familiar motion he'd done without thinking earlier. This time, there was no response. "That was a good goodbye," Ozzy whispered, voice hollow but steady. "You did it your way." His throat tightened, but still, the tears didn't come. Not yet. Grief had its own timing, its own rules. He stayed there longer than anyone expected. Minutes passed, maybe more. Ozzy thought about the words again. "Thank you for staying." They echoed now, louder in the silence than they ever had in sound. He realized something then, something that hurt and healed at the same time. Dean hadn't been afraid of dying. He'd been afraid of disappearing, of being misunderstood, of being remembered only for the shine, not the substance. And in that quiet room, Ozzy knew his role wasn't finished. He gently loosened his fingers and rested Dean's hand back on the bed, arranging it carefully, respectfully. The same way Dean had always treated others, with care, with dignity. Ozzy stood slowly, his body stiff, like it had aged years in one night. He straightened Dean's blanket, smoothing out wrinkles that no longer mattered, but still felt necessary. At the door, Ozzy paused and looked back one last time. "I'll tell them," he said softly. "I'll tell them who you really were." Then he stepped into the hallway. Life resumed immediately. Phones rang. Shoes squeaked against polished floors. Someone laughed too loudly down the hall. The contrast felt cruel. Ozzy walked forward anyway. He didn't feel strong. He didn't feel ready. But he felt responsible. Some people leave behind music. Some leave behind money. Some leave behind stories. Dean had left behind a truth, and Ozzy would make sure it wasn't lost in the noise. Not now, not ever. Days later, the world remembered Dean Martin the way it always had. Clips replayed. Songs filled the air again. Headlines spoke of legend, icon, timeless charm. People smiled when they said his name. They toasted to him. They remembered the laughter. And all of that was true. But Ozzy knew there was another truth, a quieter one. That didn't fit neatly into montages or tributes. It lived in a dim hospital room, in a hand held until the very end, in words spoken so softly they were never meant for the world. Ozzy didn't correct anyone. He didn't interrupt the stories. He let people remember Dean the way they needed to. Fame gives people ownership like that. Everyone feels entitled to a piece. But privately, Ozzy carried something else. He carried the staying. He carried the fear Dean had trusted him with, the humanity Dean had asked not to be erased, the gratitude wrapped inside those final words. And slowly, Ozzy began to understand the lesson Dean left behind wasn't about death at all. It was about how we live. We spend so much time trying to be impressive, successful, remembered. We chase applause from rooms full of people who don't know us, while forgetting to show up for the few who do. We confuse being celebrated with being loved. Dean had learned that lesson late, but he learned it honestly. At the end, none of the awards were in the room. None of the crowds, none of the noise. Just one person who stayed. Ozzy started paying closer attention after that to who showed up without being asked, to who stayed when there was nothing to gain, to who listened instead of performing. Because staying is inconvenient. Staying is quiet. Staying doesn't get applause. But staying is what people remember when everything else falls away. Ozzy never spoke publicly about Dean's final words. He didn't need to. Some truths lose their power when they're shared too loudly. Some things are meant to change one person, not impress millions. Instead, Ozzy honored Dean by living differently, calling people back, showing up when it was uncomfortable, choosing presence over polish. Because one day, whether we're ready or not, every life is reduced to a moment like that room. A moment where titles disappear, where only one question remains. Who stayed? Not who applauded. Not who benefited. Not who showed up when it was easy. Who stayed when it was hard. Dean Martin was remembered by the world for his voice. But by one person, he was remembered for something else entirely. For choosing honesty at the end. For asking to be seen as human. For valuing presence over praise. And that may be the greatest legacy of all. So if there's a lesson here, it's this. Don't wait until the end to be real. Don't save your gratitude for last words. Don't assume people know what they mean to you. Stay now. Listen now. Be human now. Because when the noise fades, and it always does, the only thing that truly lasts is who held your hand when you needed it most. Type if you believe real love is shown in presence, not performance.